Thanks so much for joining us here today on 3CR Thursday Breakfast. Shauna, how are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I wanted to really focus on the 2025 Victorian Youth Homelessness Snapshot that you've done in partnership with Social Ventures Australia. I know it's the second annual report. Could you tell me why we really wanted to gather this data and present it in this way for the second year in a row?
Yeah, sure. So MCM, Melbourne City Mission, is Victoria's largest youth homelessness provider, and we operate the statewide youth homelessness access point, Front Yard, which you may have heard of, but also numerous refuges, foyers, youth homelessness programs. And, we see time and time again this terrible journey of young people trapped in homelessness in Victoria. And we really have felt compelled to do this snapshot to really bring this data and to share our data of the experiences of these young people. And we will do this every year until we hope to see some change. And, we see, I guess, from the front line, tens of thousands of children and young people every year who are turning up traumatised and alone to homelessness services like Melbourne City Mission, driven by family violence and a lack of safe housing options. Without a safe home, they face serious risk of harm, including physical and sexual violence from others. And sadly, we know that a young person every 4 days in Australia is dying from homelessness. We also know that we've got very limited data and that a lot of the experiences, especially how they intersect, whether they're invisible or they're siloed. And we really wanted to, I guess, provide an evidence base to improve policy and investment, both from government, from philanthropy, but also the way the services are working together in Victoria as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an important point, and I think reading through the snapshot as well, uh, it's interesting with like youth homelessness when sometimes they can feel so left out from the data, but then, reading in the report that majority of these young people were known to child protection, have been, experiencing pretty much all of them family violence and experiencing homelessness sometimes before the age of 16. So it's almost like they're known to the system and then also devoid of the data. And I'm wondering if you could, yeah, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. It really is a siloed approach sometimes when it comes to data, and there's limitations in what national and state bodies can do to really decipher the data. And I know that there's some great work being done to link data sets, and that's kind of what we've tried to do in our snapshot. But this really does represent the core reality, as you said, faced by young people with nowhere to live, who are alone and invisible, and are literally trying to survive and stay alive. And these results tell a story of children and young people who are sitting in emergency departments instead of classrooms. And when I say they're sitting in emergency departments, they're not necessarily being admitted because they're homeless. But this is another issue that hopefully this snapshot data can to shed light on. But they're not in classrooms, as the data shows, and many have experienced family violence at home and that loss of family and safety. But really alarmingly, and this is no surprise to any of the services on the front line, that the policy systems are entrenching young people in crisis instead of offering them a safe home. And they're trapped for many, many years until they become adults or, enter into the adult homelessness system where you're seeing that really chronic homelessness really visible on the streets.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, yeah, understanding that yeah, young people ending up in emergency rooms and it takes years to recover if you can, or you get, yeah, lead into more and more years of chronic homelessness. And I'm wondering from the data and what you have heard about, I'm seeing that it homelessness for young people diminishes engagement in work. It's more contact with the emergency department for mental health concerns, lack of, culturally appropriate access. Uh, there's so much in that, and
Mm.
when you think about the young people that you've interviewed, um, or the data that you've collected, what is kind of happening to young people who are experiencing homelessness?
Sure, yeah, and I guess this data does show the experience and journey into crisis and homelessness. So there's some really great opportunities for intervention there, but also how the system is exacerbating the trauma and creating more trauma
Yeah.
for them by keeping them stuck. So I think, if I look at it at a high level, this snapshot shows four key things. none of which are a surprise to our staff. That firstly, young people are driven to homelessness due to family violence at home, like you mentioned. 4 out of 5 young people, that's 83%, and that's the tip of the iceberg, have experienced family violence. And of that, 67 were known to child protection. We know that, a lot of young people are, there's cases that are opened but then are closed, and that there's these kind of referral roundabouts as well in that slipping through the gaps with the child protection system. This data was also almost identical to the inaugural snapshot in 2024, which is not surprising. Secondly, there's mental health is a significant issue for young people in homelessness, from their trauma getting there and also from the experiences of homelessness itself. So we're seeing 1 in 2 young people seeking help from emergency departments to manage their mental health. It's kind of that missing middle and the issues there in terms of what's available to access in the mental health space. So the top of their list is often, the emergency department, which is unacceptable. 2 in 3 have either attempted suicide and have thoughts of suicide or are self-harming. This is an increase from last year and is absolutely devastating. And this was a new data point we looked at, which was around chronic pain. We'd heard from a lot of the young people that we employ as lived experience advisors that there is a number of children and young people who are trapped in homelessness who are living in chronic pain. So that is kind of forever pain that sometimes means that they can't they wake up and their legs aren't working, or their bodies are completely frozen, and they're in a lot of pain, whether they're on the streets or in a refuge. It's really, really unacceptable that we've got homelessness really disabling young people as well.
Yeah, it's such a
Thirdly,
such
sorry.
it's no, no, it's okay. I was just gonna comment on the fact that it's such a big issue that is also really close to my heart as well. And then knowing that um like insecure or precarious housing can impact every aspect of your life. Like think about every place that you need an address, wanting to put an address in for work. And I'm wondering if you, yeah, could talk about the impact of what it means to, be maybe without a residential address or
Mm.
in moving from shelter to shelter or yes, even like couch surfing. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what homelessness entails, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, well, I don't speak on behalf of somebody that's got an experience of homelessness, but what I hear from many young people who have survived homelessness is that, this is hard work. It is survival every day of waking up, working out where you're going to feed, where you're going to get your electricity, how you're going to stay warm or cold, cool down, where you're going to sleep the night. So, as the snapshot shows as well, that really diminishes a young person's engagement in study or work. And you hear a lot about young people being, really feeling hopeless around their future because they're searching for the next place to stay or meal, that they're losing their school or they're losing their further education or ability to work. So that was the data that showed 2 in 3 young people are not engaged in study or work. And we also broke that down to look at school age students, and that was 3 in 5. So similar data to show that they're not in school. They're, living in refuges in the streets and really spending all their time in appointments trying to navigate a system and trying to find where they're going to sleep that night, because we've got this system built that is quite short-term crisis, and you might spend a week in this refuge, you might get a few nights in a hotel here, you might have to go find a couch. It really is really exhausting, and it is exacerbating existing mental health issues, but it's also creating, this housing anxiety, this real kind of anxiety for this generation, because if you're not safe at home, if you cannot live at home, um, and with your family, that you're priced out of the private rental market, and you're also excluded from the social housing system. So this needs to obviously, be fixed urgently to ensure that we're not leaving our most vulnerable behind when we're talking about building a new, social housing system, both federally and state. So that's kind of some of the things that are, they're having to manage every day. But what they're losing, is their future and their health. And we have seen too many young people who have passed away or died by suicide over the last 12 months since this last snapshot. And we're seeing that also in, more national data coming from the federal government.
Yeah, it's truly heartbreaking numbers, and to hear that even in the 2 years of doing the snapshot, that these issues have long been there, but kind of emerging through the data. And um, when it comes to, where to from here, I know that there is a coalition, and from the snapshot, there has also been like advocacy, particularly
Mm-hmm.
around intersectionality among young people experiencing homelessness. Uh, you know, People who are First Nations, LGBTIQA+, regional, remote, people who are born outside of Australia. I know these are key demographics that you've highlighted.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, where to from here and how to be inclusive in this advocacy work.
Yeah, and it's probably, very important to point out, and it is in our data, that 13% of the young people identified as First Nations young people, which is obviously an overrepresentation, and we think that is definitely underreported. 24% from the LGBTQA plus community, and 25% were born outside of Australia, which doesn't account for the young people, who are from the calm background. And as you mentioned, there is quite a lot of young people, 26%, who come from regional, rural, and remote areas to access services, which again, isolates them from their community and from their any support networks they have in their school. So that is unacceptable as well. How we have this almost postcode lottery of justice in terms of where you can access services having to come into the inner city or the metropolitan areas to access services. In terms of what we need to see, there's been a lot of advocacy done, and it's not in a vacuum. This snapshot is just one piece of advocacy or one reporting tool. There's a body of work. There is a humongous sector who have come together under the Home Time campaign, both in Victoria and across the country. Over 170 organisations who are calling for 15,000 youth tenancies to be built into the housing system to ensure that the billions of dollars committed to social housing by the federal government through the recent election also benefits young Australians who are experiencing homelessness, because we must, dismantle these long existing barriers that are discriminating against young people who are trying to access housing. So, we need to build a dedicated youth housing response, which doesn't exist. And at the same time, we also need a dedicated and statewide family violence, or I should say national family violence response for children and young people who are alone and unsafe. So those victim survivors in their own right who might be escaping violent, um, parents and mothers, and who need a response as unaccompanied young people. So in terms of the Home Time Coalition you touched on just before, we are the Australian housing system at a federal and state level has really discriminatory barriers that impact young people and their ability to access all forms of housing, and that's purely based on their age. And that includes the lack of social housing targets for this group, which is coupled with that very low amount of income support payments in the form of youth allowance. So young people who are between the age of 15 to 24, kind of the cohort that we're looking at through Home Time, represent about 15% of the entire homelessness population across the country, but less than 3% in social housing system, because we do have a mainstream rental and housing market that doesn't differentiate between a child or young person and an adult, unlike the other systems like health or justice or legal or AOD that have set up individual or separate systems to cater for a child and an adult, because it is very different. Instead, we have children, say a 16-year-old, competing with a 40-year-old for the same property, but with less resources or earning capacity. So what the advocacy is doing is we are really advocating to have the 15,000 tenancies built in, the youth tenancies built into the housing system. And we're also advocating for increases to youth allowance so that housing providers, community housing providers, are not at a financial disadvantage when they're considering young people for their tenancies. Because of their lower income, they can collect, they collect about half the amount of rent they can from an older person if they put them in the same house. So we're really trying to work as a coalition, both at a state and federal level, to try to address these youth housing penalties and really, I guess, unlock housing opportunities or fix the housing system for young people, because currently there is no housing system for them to be able to access. As I mentioned, they're priced out of the private rental market, and they're excluded from the social housing system, which leaves them in homelessness until they're adults.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are very, very important points there. I'm wondering if, there is a young person who is listening to this who wants to get support for their housing, whether they are, a young adult under 18, or over 18, and if there is somebody in your life who is, experiencing housing insecurity, how can we support them, do you think?
That's a good question. And I think, the youth homelessness services and the youth services work extremely hard to support young people through a number of avenues, and are doing their very best, even in the context of the housing crisis. So, reaching out in Victoria, we have Front Yard. We're a Melbourne City mission, but every local area has a homelessness access point. Generally, you've got local governments who have got information as well. But, please, there's the phone line for Front Yard as well, Melbourne City Mission statewide referral and intake, or statewide referral line. So I think reaching out, it's really hard to, reach out, understandably, but there are, incredible youth homelessness organisations working really hard to find even that short-term accommodation, and looking at, education, looking at helping link back to school, or looking at, those kind of mental health needs that we've identified.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Such an important point to, just so many of our young people and people who are unhoused are some of the most, oppressed or forgotten about people in our society. So, just wanted to really bring attention to that and highlight that in this interview. But
Yeah,
thank you so
yeah,
much.
definitely. And I think for any of the young people that are safe at home, and I was one of those people, please, go to the Home Time website, and sign on to the campaign, because I think we really are engaging community, and those voices are really imperative to get that change. We are seeing a lot of interest from both state and federal government, and the more people that engage with the campaign and, write to their MPs and really, call for this housing system to be fixed for young people, I think we will get there in the end. So, yeah, just a call to action, for anyone that's feeling a little bit hopeless by seeing the data, and seeing this snapshot. There is, a huge coalition of organisations and unions and peak bodies and industry and experts, and, and the community who have come together. So there is this platform that everyone can participate in, and share their voice.
Yeah, beautiful. We'll put the snapshot in our show notes as well. And that was Shauna Moore, who is the head of policy advocacy and government relations at Melbourne City Mission, who joined me yesterday to discuss the 2025 Victorian Youth Homelessness Snapshot, which paints a really deep and intersecting challenges faced by young people experiencing homelessness in Victoria. Most young Victorians are losing their homes to family violence, many before the age of 16. Most of them have also been known to Victorian's child protection system. And experiencing chronic pain was another thing that they learnt. So lots of different populations are also overrepresented. And just as a retroactive disclaimer, it did touch on aspects of suicide. So if you do want someone to talk to, you can call their suicide callback service on 1300 659 467. That's 1300 659 467. As well as Kids Helpline on 1800 55 1800.